All right, well, that was exciting news. Our next speaker is going to help us and particularly help our federal guests take a look at some of the uniqueness of Alaska and the innovation and necessities that our uniqueness prompts on delivering services. Jesse currently serves as the Chief Executive Officer of the Alaska Mental Health Trust Authority, and we've already gotten a very good question on the intersection of these addiction issues with mental health issues. I've had the opportunity and really the honor of working with Jeff for many years on a whole bunch of different issues. For those of you who don't know, the Trust is a state corporation that administers the Mental Health Trust, a perpetual endowment in Alaska managed on behalf of the people with mental illness, developmental disabilities, chronic alcoholism, Alzheimer's disease, and related dementia. So please welcome Jeff Jesse.
Thank you, Senator, and thanks for convening this wonderful group. My name is Jeff, and I'm an alcoholic. I'm also the CEO of the Mental Health Trust Authority, and I'm privileged to be the co-chair of the state opioid task force with Gunnar Eberson from the Advisory Board on Alcohol and Drug Abuse, and Jay Butler from the State Department of Health and Social Services. He's our state medical director. And it's ably staffed by another Kate Burkhart from the Advisory Board on Alcohol and Drug Abuse. Now, why did I tell you that I'm an alcoholic? Because I have 10 years of sobriety. And yes, addiction can happen to any of us, and we need to end the stigma today. You know, one of my jobs is to talk a little bit to some of our federal officials. You know, we all know, they may not. Alaskans don't usually stand around and wait for the feds to come and fix things for us. Most things we can fix ourselves if we have a roll of duct tape and a little bit of time. So part of my job is to talk to them about, look, you know, we are doing things in Alaska to deal with this issue. You heard about what CITC and South Central Foundation is doing. You know that we have a state opioid task force that's addressing this. The legislature passed and the governor signed both major criminal justice reform, which will not continue to over-criminalize drug use, and Medicaid reform legislation, which has the opportunity to build a sustainable way to fund the services that we need to address these issues. And as Alaskans know, anything this year that you could have gotten the legislature and the governor to agree on has to be pretty important. So when we heard a little bit from Gloria, she talked about the list for our federal officials. Well, I've got part of the list. And the rest of the list is going to come this afternoon when you all have a chance in breakout sessions to inform our federal officials about what they can do to help Alaskans deal with this problem. So one of the first things the federal government can do is to continue to help us integrate behavioral health and primary care. Now, how can they do that? Well, one is when they have residency programs that they have for physicians, they need to get them invested in integrated care so that they see the entire person, not just a medical problem, but also behavioral health problems that they may have. They need to deal with the reimbursement disparities in primary care between behavioral health services and primary health care services. They need to incentivize emergency rooms to have substance use disorder professionals and peers in those locations to help people that are addicted. And when they look at their public health service professionals, they need to make sure that they have addiction and mental health opportunities for continuing education so that they are qualified to deal with the entire person. The other thing we need to do is to incentivize all healthcare professionals to get training in addiction. That's something that whether you're going in for an accident that you may have had or another health-related problem, we need everyone screened for their behavioral health issues so that they can access treatment immediately upon demand. We need support for prescription drug monitoring programs so that we can help people organize how these drugs are administered. And while we're on the subject of drugs, we need help with Big Pharma to make sure that generic drugs are available at an affordable price for the people that need medically assisted treatment. And one thing about Alaska is we don't have these highfalutin professionals in every community in our state. We need to broaden the group of professionals that can prescribe medically assisted treatment. We need to allow both physician's assistants and our advanced nurse practitioners the ability to prescribe medically assisted treatment so that we can do treatment outside of our major cities. Now, while we're at what the federal government does for all the right reasons that often hampers us and Alaskans, is there's this little provision called the IMD exclusion, which says if you have more than 16 beds in a facility, you can't bill Medicaid. Well, I understand that that was all about mental hospitals and all that back in the past, but we need to have some ability to get waivers for that here in Alaska. We don't have unlimited wealth. We have to be able to provide full quality services at the most efficient cost possible, and sometimes that's going to be in a facility more than 16 beds. And most importantly, our outstanding Commissioner of Health and Social Services, Val Davidson, is going to be coming to the feds with 1115 waivers and state plan amendments to implement our Medicaid reform efforts. The federal government needs to look favorably upon her recommendations. And finally, overall, treatment is just the first step, as you've heard from the people that talked before. What we need to do is make sure that barriers to housing, employment, and education are removed so that recovery can continue. Now, this isn't the whole list. The rest will be developed in the breakout sessions. And I just want to say this to our federal friends, is, you know, we know you're well-intentioned. But thank heavens we have Senator Sullivan and Senator Murkowski, because they're going to have this list too. And they're going to keep talking to you, and we're going to keep talking to them, and we're going to get this done. Thank you very much.
Okay, I'm not going to let Jeff leave without answering at least one question. We have one question for him?
Make it easy.
That was a rousing speech here. Nothing?
I'm here.
Over here.
I'm
Okay.
here. Can you hear me?
There you go. Okay.
No, I'm here.
Great.
Where? Jeff, I'm not sure if this is working. The question I have for you, and it isn't something you can deal with, but I think it's something that needs to be said. We run Aquila House, which was founded in '74 to serve opiate addicts. We didn't talk about it being an epidemic then because they weren't middle-class folks and didn't live on the hillside in Anchorage. But that particular program had 48 beds when I went to work there 25 years ago. Today, our budget is $100,000 less than it was in FY '92. So I don't know how we continue to serve these people. It's also an IMD'd out program so that we can't collect Medicaid for it. I am really concerned that we look at this epidemic, we look at some of us who have spent years doing the kinds of service opiate addicts need, and they're the programs that are getting cut the most.
Well, thanks, Rosalie. That's why we mentioned the issues that we did. Looking at the efforts of our commissioner when she goes back to the feds and makes some recommendations for some waivers and other things that they can do to help us, including the IMD waiver. And then we, of course, in Alaska have to get our fiscal house in order so that we have the resources to fund those beds that need to be made available.
Excuse me? They gave me the mic so I don't shut up easily. On your list, please, with the military in the audience and for others, when you're looking at fixing this problem, not only do we not have enough beds here in Alaska, but if you look outside, the detox, the facilities that we need do not accept Medicare. So some will accept TRICARE, but the majority of them don't accept TRICARE, and I'd say 90 or more % do not accept Medicare. So the older addict or alcoholic who is looking for trouble has $30,000 to $40,000 a month out of their pocket. So I hope when you're trying to fix things, you find a way to get them to accept more insurance.
Well, thank you, and this is why trying to fit in the Q&A from the audience is so important, because these are great suggestions and important issues that everybody's raising. So I want to thank Jeff. Again, you can see he's a great advocate. Our next speaker is a very special guest. It's a very big honor that we have the Deputy Secretary for HHS for the United States, Dr. Mary Wakefield. Again, I was going to go through her bio, which is incredibly impressive, but as many of you know, HHS is actually the largest federal agency in terms of budget by far in the federal government, bigger than the Pentagon. And what's been great about Dr. Wakefield and her visit and honoring us to speak here today, she's also taken the opportunity to travel literally all over the state, Barrow, Fairbanks, Circle. She's leaving after her remarks and Q&A to go to Kenai. So let's give a warm welcome, and she's going to take some questions. A warm welcome for the Deputy Secretary of HHS.
Thank you very much, Senator Sullivan. First, thank you for the invitation to be here with all of you today. Just special thanks for that invitation, and for Senator bringing all of us together here to talk about such an extremely important issue. I also want to thank and acknowledge Alaska's other senator, Senator Lisa Murkowski, for her commitment as well. You've got two tremendous leaders on this issue in Washington, D.C., and we look forward to our continued work with them. Their commitment is, of course, first and foremost to all of you, but their commitment is also important on this issue for communities all across the United States. I know, too, that the people of Alaska right here are also benefiting from some really hard work of the Alaska Opioid Task Force, a group that does a great job representing the diversity of Alaska's communities, as well as the diversity of the public systems that together are working to fight this epidemic, an epidemic here in your hometowns and an epidemic that is sweeping the country. And really, the presence of all of you in this room today is just, it's very powerful. It speaks volumes about the importance of this issue to you, and it also speaks volumes about your collective determination to address it and address it head on. So it's a particular privilege to be here at Senator Sullivan's request and to be part of the work that he's trying to advance in Washington, D.C. And I also want to give a special shout out to the very powerful voices that we heard at the beginning of this morning's meeting. They are women who are speaking up and speaking out, and that takes all of us to listen very intently and to act on what they have shared with us today. Someone said to me how much they appreciated my traveling thousands of miles to be here. My journey is nothing compared to the journey of those women and others right here in this room today. So special thanks, not to me, but to all of you. We're all here to support and advance your work. In addition, I'd also like to just very quickly recognize the gracious tribal communities that I've been meeting with over the course of this week. I've had the opportunity to meet with the Arctic Slope Native Association, the Tanana Chiefs Conference, and the Cook Inlet Tribal Council. And this afternoon, I'm really looking forward to sitting down with leaders from the Kanaitse, pardon me, I clearly haven't had enough coffee, and that time zone change is tough on me. But I'll be sitting down this afternoon to meet with leaders from the Kanaitse Indian tribe as well. You know, the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services has very, very important working relationships and resources that are flowing to and through those organizations and also to other communities across this great state. So it's been terrific to be able to be here and get in touch and stay in touch with local challenges and opportunities to support the important health of Alaskans, regardless of where in the state they live. And I just would say as an aside, you've got leaders that are known to us on a first-name basis. Valerie Davidson, Gloria O'Neill. They're your resources. I'm here to tell you, they're our resources too. So they're a connection not just for you, but they're people who inform us with their expertise. They're a phone call away from me. I have the opportunity to interact with them in Washington, and they are exceptional spokespeople who help to advance your health agenda in this state. And there are others just like them from the state of Alaska. You're all really quite remarkable. So here we are today to talk about a very urgent, very, very urgent challenge, a challenge that's found, as has already been discussed, in communities across Alaska. It's also found in communities in every single state in this country. This challenge has resulted in far too many American families having absolute, heartbreaking loss of family members. Loss as a result of overdose deaths involving opioids. And in fact, since 1999, the rate of overdose deaths from opioids has nearly quadrupled in our country. To put a little bit of a finer point on this problem, every day in this nation, every single day in this nation, about 78 people die from a drug overdose related to opioids. This epidemic, as Senator Sullivan noted, now kills more people in the United States than car accidents. This epidemic is now the leading cause of injury-related deaths in the United States. And unfortunately, on an average day in the United States, across our nation, on an average day, sunny day, cloudy day, on an average day, about 580 people initiate heroin use in this country. That's the epidemic we're talking about. That's the epidemic we're here to address. Reversing that trend is absolutely urgent. And in 2014, right here in Alaska, 124 people died as a result of drug overdose in 1 year. Out of the 50 states and Washington, D.C., Alaska ranks 20th in the nation for the proportion of drug overdose deaths. And in 2014, the rate of deaths in Alaska by drug poisoning rose above the national average. Across the nation, this epidemic has hit rural communities particularly hard. In 2014, the 5 states with the highest rates of opioid overdoses were, in fact, rural states. High rates of chronic pain and chronic illness make the risk of opioid use disorder and overdose particularly challenging in rural communities. The start can begin with something as innocent as treatment for pain associated with a fairly simple injury. Or the start can be a result of pretty straightforward surgery and a treatment for that associated pain. Or the start can have its beginnings in a course of treatment for chronic pain. Or the presence of opioids in one's home can be a source for someone to begin or for someone to continue an opioid use disorder. And that someone, by the way, may not at all be the person for whom those drugs were prescribed. And the source, of course, can also be on the streets of any neighborhood across our country. So to push back hard against opioid misuse and overdose, at the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, we have committed to a 3-part strategy. that guides our efforts to reduce prescription opioid and heroin use disorder. This strategy guides our efforts with the aim of reducing overdose and death. Let me say just a word about each one of those three parts. First, we're making sure that health professionals have the tools and the information that they need to make informed prescribing decisions, specifically focusing on reducing inappropriate opioid prescribing. We've already heard a little bit about that this morning. For example, at HHS, we recently launched a series of webinars to educate providers about how to integrate opioid prescribing guidelines that are supplied by the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention and that are designed to be incorporated into clinical practice. Already, from just the first 2 webinars that have been offered by CDC, we've had healthcare clinicians join those webinars from right here in the state of Alaska. And for people living in tribal communities, the Indian Health Service has adopted a policy requiring that prescribers and pharmacists check the state prescription drug monitoring program databases before they prescribe or dispense opioids for a patient for more than 7 days. By checking the PDMP database before prescribing, clinicians can improve pain management. They can help identify patients who may have an opioid misuse problem, and they can also help to prevent diversion of those medications. The second part of our strategy is to expand access to treatment that combines medication with behavioral health services, an approach referred to as medication-assisted treatment. Just last month, we finalized our rule on use of the drug buprenorphine, one of the 3 medications for this treatment that has been approved by the FDA. This effort at HHS helps to facilitate more people being able to benefit from this treatment. Before this new rule, healthcare providers had to get a waiver in order to prescribe buprenorphine to a maximum of 100 patients. Now they can prescribe that treatment to up to 275 patients. These efforts are so important. In fact, a recent HHS report indicates that of the 2.2 million people who currently need treatment for opioid use disorder, fewer than 1 million are able to get it. We want to ensure that every single American that wants to get help from opioid addiction is able to get help for opioid addiction. And this morning, in another meeting, I'd also heard about some particular problems that this epidemic is creating here, impacting infants and children and mothers, pregnant women. Well, at HHS, we've just recently released 2 new reports from the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, SAMHSA. 2 new reports focused on ways to help pregnant women and new mothers who are struggling with an opioid use disorder. We think it's important, too. One report is targeted to providers, and that report outlines how clinicians can provide specialized treatment to women with opioid use disorder and treatment for their infants who are exposed to opioid use. The other report is designed and intended to outline policy considerations for states, for state agencies, communities, and service providers, and how they can collaborate to provide the best treatment for pregnant women with opioid use disorder. And if any of you have any interest in either one of those reports, either the policy considerations report or the report that focuses on helping providers deliver high-quality care to that vulnerable population, you can get them right off of SAMHSA's website at samhsa.gov. That's, and copies of those reports can be downloaded, many copies, obviously, as you wish. Finally, the third part of our strategy is focused on making sure that more people can get access to naloxone, a life-saving medication which can reverse opioid overdoses. That's critically important, and we see that too. What great cheerleader folks we've got over here, by the way. You guys are terrific. In addition to the work that I've mentioned already that we have underway at HHS, the President is also deeply committed to reversing the trend of this epidemic. And that's the reason why he asked for, in his 2017 budget, a budget-level request of $1.1 billion to address this problem. Those are resources needed to provide funds for prevention and treatment for people here in Alaska and across the nation. And as was indicated last month, great good news, the Congress passed an opioids bill and the President signed it, and the administration believes that those provisions are very important. And the administration also believes that we need additional adequate funding in order to fully implement many of those very important provisions. Most importantly, to provide treatment services, some of the very need that's already been identified in the conversations right here this morning. In the meantime, at HHS, we'll continue to do everything that we can to support prevention and treatment, the treatment that people need in communities across the country. And we very much look forward to making meaningful progress on this epidemic with leaders in Congress, leaders like Senator Sullivan, leaders like Senator Murkowski. One of the areas that we're particularly focused on is ensuring that rural communities get the resources that they need to fight this epidemic, for the reasons that I mentioned at the beginning of my remarks. Just last month, for example, we announced $9 million in grants to promote medication-assisted treatment in rural primary care. There's the integration, primary care behavioral health, that was called for just before I spoke. It's an example of that integration. Just a few months ago, we awarded $94 million to community health centers. More than $1.7 million of those dollars came right here to Alaska to promote substance use treatment services and to help health centers treat opioid use disorders in underserved populations. And last September, we launched the Rural Opioid Overdose Reversal Program, giving 18 rural communities across the nation $100,000 each to buy and distribute naloxone, to train people on how to use it and to help connect people using naloxone with treatment. As of last month, those communities have trained more than 600 people in using naloxone. Those communities have collectively reported more than 80 reversals of opioid overdoses. That's 80 life-saving moments. Those are 80 second chances for someone's mother, for someone's child, for someone's neighbor. That's how important this work is. And we plan to share what we learn with those specific investments with other rural communities across the country. And the President's budget request of Congress for fiscal year 17 includes a request for $10 million that would help us to extend the reach of that program to even more rural communities. Under the President's budget, Alaska would be eligible for about $4 million to help Alaskans access that treatment for opioid use disorders. I think it's also important to note the consequences of this epidemic are severe and they are significant enough that the work at the federal level actually goes even beyond the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. We are executing on this agenda broadly across the federal government through President Obama's White House Rural Council. For example, we are working closely with and through the U.S. Department of Agriculture because of that rural need to focus, and working directly with other federal agencies like the VA and others as well. As my boss, Secretary Burwell, has said, changing the trends in this epidemic requires every single one of us, to work together. Doesn't matter where we come from, doesn't matter what side of the aisle we're on. This is a shared agenda that requires all of us working together, from local neighborhoods to state governments to the federal government as well. That's incredibly important, I think, because this epidemic is most dangerous when individuals and when families impacted directly feel alone, when they feel powerless, when they cannot see a place to turn to for help. That's when this epidemic is most dangerous. This epidemic is most dangerous when communities feel like this problem is bigger than the resources that they have to stop it. So it's meetings like this one that are so important because they bring all of us together to fully engage this challenge in partnership with each other. And it's our full intent to turn the tide of this epidemic and to do the hard work and the critically important work of protecting our families across this nation. And we very much look forward to doing more of this work in partnership with each of you. Thanks so much to Senator Sullivan and to all of you for the invitation to be with you this morning. Oh, Dawson. And I would be happy to hear a comment, a concern that you would like me to take back to you, HHS, or a question that you might have. I have time for just a couple, and be delighted to hear them. Especially ideas and things that you think we should be focused on in Washington. Yes, please.
I'm up top here. I'm Dr. Sean Hadley, and back in the 80s, I was the medical director of the first and the last cognitive behavioral chronic pain management program we had here in Alaska. And so we've had no such program since the 80s. And, hearing, a lot about treatment, and the stories that I'm hearing here today are just heartbreaking. But I guess I would like, I think more emphasis needs to be placed on prevention, which means working with medical providers, and there has to be some way to be able to direct those unenlightened providers who are providing way too much in the way of opioids for their patients. Because I can tell you, they're not going to be the ones watching your webinar. Or even if they do, I'm not sure they're going to get the message. And it continues to be a serious problem here. And if you don't kind of attack the root of the problem, I think that our efforts, everybody's efforts, are going to be frustrated.
And thanks for that comment. It's such an important focus. And in fact, it was a little bit where I started my comments on the three-part strategy. We know that we've got to engage healthcare providers across the country. I'm a nurse by background. That's my educational background. And I can tell you that thank you for that one piece of applause I might have heard of. Maybe there's another nurse in the room. But what I wanted to say is that the way many of us were taught to practice, even 15, 20, 30 years ago, is a different, there's a different set of evidence that clinicians need to be working from today. And we're doing our level best through that first part of a three-part strategy to drive prevention, first through providers, the source and resource of opioids in this country. And that's a very important flag for us. So if there are other strategies that you think we should be using to touch more clinicians across the country, we very much welcome hearing them. I couldn't agree with you more. That's one of our most important starting points. Yeah. Other question or comment or suggestion? Yes, please.
Maya.
To pain management within inpatient. And as long as that is connected and patients can say you're not treating my pain and it's going to, I think that it's a very vicious circle that keeps our providers stuck in a position where they feel they have to prescribe. So that's...
Yeah, that's that too. Okay, I'll speak faster, Senator Sullivan. That, too, is a really important program, and you'll perhaps be pleased to know it's not lost on us. So CMS has just recently been making changes in collecting data through HCAHPS. You'd probably be familiar with that standardized survey that hospitals use across the United States that historically is tied to reimbursement and is disconnecting that link between patients comments on the survey question associated with pain management. The hospitals can retain the question, but it's not factored in going forward into reimbursement. So we heard from other providers just like you about that incentive that seems to play out in a way that none of us would be interested in seeing it play out. We want patients in hospitals to have their pain managed effectively. So the question stays in there, but it no longer is part of that set of questions that will be used to determine reimbursement. So thanks for raising that too. Pleased to say we're on it.
Thank you. I'm just going to say a couple of nice words. So I want to thank the Secretary Madam Secretary, for coming out here, for your great remarks. I think one of the really important things, and you're seeing it literally up here, and by the way, her remarks about Senator Murkowski, who's going to wrap up the morning session in terms of a great partner, someone who's also very focused on this, someone who's on the committees that are focused on this. I think it's really important when you see all of us here, this is an issue that goes way beyond politics or partisan politics, right, as it should. And so, Madam Secretary, thank you. Thank you for spending so much time in Alaska. I know you're heading out to the Kenai. Please keep us in mind on the grants when you're looking at them. And I just want to thank you. How about one more round of applause for the Secretary? Okay, so we're gonna take a 10-minute break. It's really got to be 10 minutes. By the way, for the folks who are standing, there's plenty of seats down front. So after the break, we have some coffee and donuts and pastries. For those of you who are watching online, and we have a lot of Alaskans watching online, stay tuned. We're going to be back in 10 minutes. We're going to still have some great federal speakers and wrap up the morning session with Senator Murkowski. Thank you.